Welcome to Quiet Queen's Reckoning. I'm so glad you're here. Now, let's get into the story. Margaret Calloway's husband and his 26-year-old girlfriend stood laughing in the warm glow of the kitchen Margaret had designed herself, clinking their wine glasses together while they watched her load her own suitcase into the back of her car in the November sleet. Derek was still in his work shirt, loosened at the collar, looking more relaxed than Margaret had seen him in years. Natalie Chen, the junior associate at his firm, who had been eating dinner at Margaret's table for the past 8 months under the pretense of mentorship, was wearing Margaret's cashmere cardigan. The one Margaret had bought herself in Edinburgh 3 years ago on what she had believed was a second honeymoon. They thought they were watching a woman retreat. They did not know that the phone Margaret had quietly slipped into her coat pocket contained a single encrypted contact, and that one call to that contact would begin the most methodical dismantling of a man's life that the province of Ontario had ever quietly witnessed. Derek Calloway had a particular kind of confidence that came not from achievement, but from the unchallenged assumption that the world had been arranged for his comfort. He had grown up in a modest suburb of London, Ontario, the son of a hardware store owner, and had clawed his way into a senior partnership at Hartwell & Associates, a mid-sized corporate law firm in downtown Toronto, through a combination of genuine intelligence and a complete absence of conscience. He wore his ambition like a second skin. He drove a charcoal Audi he leased on the firm's account. He spoke at dinner parties with the measured authority of a man who had never once been corrected in public. When he met Margaret 8 years ago at a fundraising gala for the Toronto Symphony, he saw exactly what he wanted to see. A quiet woman in a simple navy dress who smiled easily, asked thoughtful questions, and seemed entirely unimpressed by his cufflinks. He had found her modesty intoxicating. He had interpreted her stillness as softness. He had spent 8 years systematically mistaking her patience for passivity. He had never once asked her why. For a woman who claimed to work as a freelance architectural consultant, she received so few invoices and so many private phone calls she always took in the other room. Margaret Elise Calloway, née Ashford, was 39 years old. She had been described at various points in her life as reserved, self-contained, and difficult to read. These descriptions were accurate. What people rarely added, what most people in her daily life had no reason to suspect, was that she was the eldest daughter of Robert Ashford, the largely invisible founder of Ashford Capital Partners, a private infrastructure investment firm that held stakes in toll highways, municipal water treatment facilities, and commercial real estate across 6 Canadian provinces. The Ashford family did not appear on lists. They did not give interviews. They funded endowments anonymously and moved money through structures so layered and deliberately opaque that even their own accountants sometimes needed a diagram. Margaret had grown up understanding that visible wealth was a liability. Her father had taught her that before she learned long division. She had also grown up understanding that the people who pursued you for your name rarely had anything worth offering in return. When she decided at 31 to build something that felt like a real life, a smaller life, a life where she was chosen for herself, her father had agreed to let her try. On one, she would carry a phone. She would check in monthly with the family's head of private security, a former RCMP intelligence officer named Frank Delorme. And she would never, under any circumstances, allow herself to be in physical danger without calling him first. She had carried the phone for 8 years. She had called Frank exactly once before tonight. When a stranger had followed her from a parking garage in 2019, Frank had resolved the situation in 40 minutes and never mentioned it again. Tonight, pulling out of the driveway of the Rosedale home that Derek believed he co-owned, sleet tapping against the windshield of her unremarkable gray Subaru, Margaret reached into her coat pocket. She pulled out the phone, not her regular iPhone. The other one. She pressed call. Frank Delorme picked up on the second ring. He always picked up on the second ring. Margaret. Not a question. A statement of readiness. Frank. She turned right at the end of the street, driving with the particular steadiness of someone who has made a decision and is no longer in negotiation with herself. Derek has asked me to leave the house. He's filed for divorce. There's a woman with him. I found a secondary bank account tonight. He's been moving money out of our joint savings for at least 14 months. I don't have exact figures yet. The sound of a chair adjusting, quiet and precise. Are you safe? I'm in the car. He didn't touch me. A pause. He didn't need to. He had the locks changed this afternoon. I came home to a new key that didn't work, and a letter from his lawyer on the front step. A long silence. With me. The kind Frank used when he was already thinking 3 moves ahead. Where are you going tonight? The Hazelton. I have a reservation. She had made it 2 weeks ago, actually, when she first noticed the pattern in the accounts. Margaret was not a woman who waited until the last moment to arrange her exits. All right, Frank said. I'm going to need you to send me everything you have on the secondary account, name of the institution, any transaction records you've accessed, the approximate timeline. Already in your secure folder. I uploaded it this afternoon. Another pause, shorter this time. Of course you did. There was something that wasn't quite warmth in his voice, but was adjacent to it. What are you asking for, Margaret? Full picture. She watched the sleet streak sideways across the beam of her headlights. Ever. She thought about the look on Natalie's face. Not guilty, not ashamed, but triumphant in the way of someone who's been waiting a long time to stop pretending. She thought about Derek's hand resting on the small of Natalie's back as they stood in Margaret's kitchen. She thought about the Edinburgh cardigan, which Natalie had taken from Margaret's own closet. I want the house, Margaret said. He doesn't know that I know it's mine. Frank's silence this time had a different quality. Oh, attentive. Careful. 3 years ago, Margaret continued, when Derek's financing fell through on the Rosedale property. He never told me the details, just that there had been a complication. I had Ashford's property division acquire the home through a numbered company and structure a private mortgage through a holding entity. Derek has been making payments to an account he believes is a conventional lender. It isn't. Every dollar he's paid in the past 3 years has gone into a conservation trust in my name. She kept her voice even. He has never owned that house. He does not know that. The sound of typing began. Steady, deliberate. I also want his partnership reviewed, Margaret said. The secondary account. The one he opened without telling me. He's been routing money from client settlements into it. I recognized 2 of the case reference numbers from documents I found on his desk 18 months ago. I noted them at the time because something felt wrong. I should have acted sooner. I didn't. Why didn't you? She considered the question honestly, the way she did most things. I wanted to be wrong about him, she said finally. I kept finding reasons to believe the version of him I'd married still existed somewhere. That's not his fault. It's mine. I won't make the same calculation again. I'm going to make some calls. The client fund diversion, if it's what it looks like, puts him in violation of the Law Society of Ontario's rules of conduct, not just civil law. That's disbarment territory before we even get to criminal exposure. I know. The woman in the house. Natalie Chen. She works at Hartwell? She's a second-year associate. She's been using my home address for her professional mentorship files. I found a correspondence package in Derek's briefcase in September. I photographed it. That's also in the secure folder? Yes. The typing continued for a moment. Then Frank said very quietly, You've been sitting on this for 2 months. I needed to know the full shape of it before I moved. Right. A breath. Get to the hotel. Order room service. I'll have a preliminary briefing for you by 7 a.m. Thank you, Frank. Margaret. He stopped. Started again. Your father is going to want to know. I know, she said. Tell him I'm fine. Tell him I handled it. She ended the call and drove the rest of the way to the hotel in silence, the sleet softening gradually into snow. The Hazelton Hotel on Wellington Street West was the kind of place that understood discretion as a service. Margaret had stayed here before. Always under a name that traced back to one of her father's holding companies, always in a suite with blackout curtains and a separate work area. She checked in efficiently, declined the offer of assistance with her single bag, and rode the elevator alone to the 4th floor. She set her bag on the luggage rack without unpacking it. She ordered a pot of tea and a bowl of soup from room service. She sat in the armchair by the window, watching the snow come down over the city, and she allowed herself exactly 20 minutes to feel the full weight of 8 years collapsing. She had loved Derek Calloway. That was the part she couldn't shortcut around. The part that resisted the clean analytical frame she preferred to apply to difficult situations. Only, she had loved him in the specific way that cautious people love. Slowly, and then entirely, and she had spent the better part of a year trying to find an explanation for what she was seeing. That wasn't the obvious one. The late nights, the second phone, the gradual, practiced distance that a man builds between himself and a woman he has already decided to leave before he tells her. The soup arrived. She ate it. She let herself cry. For approximately 12 minutes, which she had learned long ago, was about as long as crying was functionally useful. Then she opened her laptop, connected to the hotel's encrypted business network, and began to read Frank's preliminary file, which had arrived at 11:47 p.m., well ahead of schedule. Derek Calloway had been diverting settlement funds for 22 months. The total figure, across 11 client matters, was just under $430,000. Routed through a numbered account at a credit union in Mississauga, registered under a name Margaret didn't recognize. Frank's team had already identified the name as belonging to Derek's younger brother, who lived in Calgary and appeared to have no knowledge that his identity had been used. The account had been funding, among other things, a deposit on a condominium on King Street West, a 2-bedroom unit listed under Natalie Chen's name, purchased 4 months ago. Margaret read the file 3 times. Then she closed the laptop, set an alarm for 6:30, and went to sleep. She was a woman who could always sleep when she had made a decision. This had been true since childhood, and it had unnerved people around her for most of her adult life. Her mother called it a gift. Her father called it evidence that she had inherited his temperament. A therapist she had seen briefly in her late 20s had called it dissociation. Margaret had politely disagreed and not returned. By 7 a.m. Frank had sent a second briefing, more detailed than the first. By 8, he had connected her, via encrypted video call, with a senior partner at a law firm that handled exclusively high-stakes family and corporate matters, a woman named Claire Ozzie, who had the particular manner of someone who finds crisis professionally invigorating. By 9, Margaret had signed a retainer agreement. By 9:15, Claire Ozzie had filed an emergency motion with the Ontario Superior Court of Justice. At 9:47 a.m., Derek Calloway walked into the offices of Hartwell and Associates on Bay Street, nodded at the receptionist, helped himself to a coffee in the partner's kitchen, and found a sealed envelope on his desk, with his name written on it in the firm's standard administrative font. He opened it as a letter from the managing partner, Douglas Hartwell himself, informing Derek that effective immediately, his partnership was suspended, pending an internal investigation into the handling of client trust funds, as initiated by a formal complaint filed with the Law Society of Ontario overnight. His key card had been deactivated. His firm email had been suspended. A member of the IT department would be available to supervise him in retrieving personal items from his office. He was to have no contact with current clients or colleagues during the investigation period. The letter was 2 paragraphs long. It was written with the precise, devastating economy of a man who had been a lawyer for 31 years and had written exactly this kind of letter before. Derek read it twice. Then he sat down heavily in his chair and picked up his personal cell phone to call Margaret. She didn't answer. She was in a meeting with Claire Ozzie, reviewing the affidavit that had accompanied the court filing. The affidavit detailed, with documentary evidence attached, the origin and ownership structure of the Rosedale property. It named Ashford Capital Partners as the beneficial owner. It included 3 years of payment records, the original acquisition documents, and a legal opinion confirming that the private mortgage agreement Derek had signed, which he had reviewed carefully because he was a lawyer, and he reviewed everything carefully, contained a clause, in standard language, that he had not flagged, confirming that the property title remained with the lending entity until the mortgage was discharged in full. He had not discharged it. He had paid approximately 38% of the principal. He did not own the house. He had never owned the house. He had signed the documents himself. By 11 a.m., Derek's personal bank accounts had been frozen by court order, pending the civil claims from both Ashford's property company and the Hartwell firm's insurance underwriters, who had been notified of the trust fund irregularities and had immediately commenced their own recovery proceedings. His His credit cards, 4 of them, across 3 institutions, were declined when he attempted to pay for a parking ticket outside the Bay Street office. He called Margaret 7 more times between 11 and 2. She did not answer any of them. At 2:15, a courier arrived at the Rosedale house with a formal notice from Ashford Property Holdings Inc. advising current occupant, identified in the notice as Derek Calloway, non-owning tenant, that his tenancy was terminated effective immediately due to material breach of the mortgage agreement, specifically the clause prohibiting unauthorized third-party occupation of the property without written consent of the title holder, Natalie Chen, who was not named on any document associated with the property, was identified as an unauthorized occupant and was required to vacate. Concurrently, the notice was signed by a property management company Margaret had never publicly been associated with. Natalie read the notice over Derek's shoulder in the front hallway of the house. She had been in a good mood until approximately 30 seconds before. She had been planning in a vague and pleasant way what she might do with the walk-in closet now that Margaret's things were gone. "What does this mean?" she asked. Her voice had the particular pitch of someone who has been told bad news in a language they do not yet speak fluently. "It means we have to leave," Derek said. He was looking at the document with the focused, slightly nauseated expression of a lawyer who has just noticed, too late, the clause he missed. "Leave, Eric? I gave up my apartment. I gave notice 2 weeks ago." "I know. Where are we supposed to go?" He didn't have an answer. His accounts were frozen. His firm credit card was canceled. The lease on the Audi was through a firm account that had been suspended. When he pressed the button on his key fob in the driveway 20 minutes later, the car's onboard system displayed a single notification: vehicle remotely disabled. Contact fleet management. He stood in the driveway of a house that wasn't his, in front of a car he couldn't start, with his phone battery at 11%. Natalie came out behind him with a weekend bag and her work laptop, which she was now also locked out of, having received her own Law Society notification. As a junior associate, she was named in the internal investigation as a person of interest regarding her knowledge of the fund diversions, given her close personal relationship with the implicated partner. She had not yet decided whether she had known. She was in the early stages of understanding that this was a question she was going to be answering for quite some time. She looked at Derek with an expression that Margaret, had she been present, would have recognized from the kitchen window the night before. The expression of someone recalibrating who is responsible for the situation they are currently in. "You told me the house was yours," Natalie said. "Oh, I thought it was. You're a lawyer. I know. You reviewed the mortgage documents. I know, Natalie. And you didn't notice." I said I know. She picked up her bag. She called a rideshare. She did not offer to share it with him. Margaret was not watching any of this in real time. She was having lunch with her father at a restaurant in Yorkville. A quiet corner table, the way they always met. And she was telling him, in the measured cadence she had learned from watching him across boardroom tables as a child, exactly what had happened and exactly what she had done about it. Robert Ashford was 71 years old, white-haired, and possessed of a stillness that Margaret had spent her entire life studying. He listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. He looked at his daughter across the table. The same careful eyes, the same composed mouth, the same particular quality of paying attention that looked, to the uninformed observer, like reserve, but was in fact something much more active. "Did you love him?" he asked. "Yes," Margaret said. "And now?" She thought about it honestly. "I feel sorry for him," she said. He built his whole sense of himself on the belief that he was the smartest person in the room. He spent 8 years in a room with me, and he never once thought to check that assumption. She paused. "That's a sad way to move through the world." Her father nodded slowly. "You're more generous than I would be." "I'm not being generous," she said. "I'm being accurate." He smiled then, briefly and with genuine warmth, and picked up his fork. Frank delivered a final briefing to Margaret at 4 p.m. that afternoon. Derek Calloway had checked into a hotel in Etobicoke, a budget property, the kind that took walk-ins without a credit card authorization if you paid cash, which he had scraped together from the emergency envelope he kept in his home office, which he had been allowed to retrieve under supervision before the property locks were changed. Natalie Chen had called her parents in Markham. She was spending the night there. Law Society investigation was formally underway. The civil claim from Ashford Property Holdings had been acknowledged by Derek's emergency retained lawyer, a junior sole practitioner who, Frank noted with the faintest trace of something that might have been pity, was almost certainly going to be in over his head. Margaret read the briefing in Claire Osie's boardroom, made 3 notes in the margin, and set it aside. She did not feel triumphant. She had known she wouldn't. She was too clear-eyed about the nature of what had happened, about the years she had spent choosing to believe in a version of Derek that he had in the end been incapable of sustaining. She had made that choice herself, and she owned it. What she felt, she decided, driving back to the Hazelton in the early winter dark, was accurate, like a compass that had been slightly off for years and had finally been recalibrated. The needle finding north again. Clean and reliable. Oh, she called her sister from the car. "It's done," she said. "Are you okay?" Margaret considered the question with the same care she applied to most things. "I'm going to be," she said. "I think I've been not okay for a while without fully admitting it. Come for dinner on Sunday." "Yes," Margaret said. "I'll bring wine." She parked the car. She walked into the hotel. At the front desk, a message had been left for her. A card, handwritten, from the concierge, who had checked her in the previous evening. It said simply, "We hope your stay has been comfortable. Please let us know if there is anything you need." She kept the card, which she knew was a small and irrational thing to do, and went upstairs. She ordered dinner again. This time she ate it at the table by the window, watching the city below, the lights of downtown Toronto, multiplied and softened by the thin layer of snow on the streets. She poured herself a glass of Bordeaux from the minibar, which was absurdly overpriced, and she sat with it for a while without drinking it, just holding the glass, letting the warmth of it move through her fingers. Derek Calloway would rebuild. She knew that about him. The drive was real, even when the integrity wasn't. He would find his footing eventually, in some smaller version of the life he had tried to manufacture. He would tell the story of what happened to him in a way that made someone else the architect of his ruin. That was fine. She had no interest in his version of the story. She had her own. 8 years ago, she had walked into a room and decided to be someone who could be loved simply, without the weight of her family's name preceding her. It had been a genuine attempt, not a performance. She had wanted something real. She had gotten, instead, a man who had looked at her simplicity and seen an opportunity to feel large. She couldn't have known that at the beginning. She could see it clearly now. What she knew, what she had always known, on some frequency below conscious thought, the knowledge her father had put in her, without ever stating it directly, was that real power had no need to perform itself. It didn't raise its voice. It didn't demand recognition. It simply remained what it was, quietly and completely. And when the moment came that required it to be seen, it was already there. Derek had locked the door of her house to put her in her place. She had let him. She had sat in the sleet and waited, and by morning, every door he thought he owned had been opened from the inside by someone who had always had the keys. Margaret Ashford lifted her glass and drank.